Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is set to speak at the forthcoming World Economic Forum Summit in 2026, and because the WEF has had an insidious undue influence over nation states' policy, particularly during the COVID pandemic, lockdowns, pushing things like vaccine passports or digital ID, the national populist grassroots base of reform are very concerned about the fact that the Reform Party has been ideologically captured by nefarious globalist forces. Now, I am going to do something unpopular here and present a value-free analysis of the reasons why, for economic or foreign policy means, it's actually a smart move for Nigel Farage to go and speak at Davos, despite denouncing it years prior. The Financial Times first reported this, and they said that Nigel Farage is expected to attend the World Economic Forum in Davos next week, rubbing shoulders with top politicians and business figures from around the world, despite criticising the conference in the past. Other attendees at the event in the mountain resort in Switzerland are expected to include US President Donald Trump, UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and the likes of executives from JP Morgan and Santander. And this is the real reason that Nigel Farage is going. It's because the regime, the international business and political class, who have gotten very comfortable pushing woke environmental causes through ESG scores, think Larry Fink of BlackRock and Klaus Schwab, the architect of the World Economic Forum, but also the international institutions like the United Nations and the European Union, are being forced to reckon with changing geopolitical plate tectonics with the invasion of Ukraine, the rise of China, the consolidation of a parallel economic bloc in BRICS that are snapping up rare earth minerals, supply chains, oil, gold, and gas, and then the re-election of President Trump, focusing via the Monroe Doctrine on consolidating the Western Hemisphere, that's North and South America, as the domain of US dominance. This is why they kidnapped Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. This is why they have brokered deals with US-friendly Argentinian President Javier Milei, who's just been appointed to Trump's Gaza Peace Board, and, of course, Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, the world's most famous elected dictator, who has cleaned up his country from a basket case overridden by a satanic gang MS-13 to being peaceful, prosperous, and now having Bitcoin as its legal tender. What Farage is doing here is he is going to the International Business Summit, a legacy holdover of the previous pro-woke ESG, EU, UN hegemony, and is using the cover of the fact that Javier Milei and Donald Trump have both given speeches, very famously, excoriating said elites on their own turf, in their own terms, and using the cover of having excoriated said elites by saying, you've got the charisma of a damp rag, and, well, you're not laughing at me now when I told you that Brexit was the right way to go, rerunning his greatest hits, to then network with business executives from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, the Emiratis, and the Saudi Arabia, of course, and also to realign Reform UK as the presumptive next party of government with the foreign policy priorities of the United States, Israel and the Abraham Accords, as well as nations in the Western Hemisphere like Argentina and El Salvador. This is why Reform have put forward lots of cryptocurrency policies. It's not just because George Cottrell, the finance bro who is very close with Nigel Farage, has a crypto business, but it's because these are the technologies that are being innovated on in these global capital hubs, in America, in Israel, in the UAE, and of course in El Salvador. And this is why, of course, they've been using El Salvador as the model for criminal justice reform, something that I actually support, one of Reform's better policies. So it's not that Nigel Farage has sold out. It's not that he has necessarily reneged on his previous promise, as he tweeted twice during the 2024 election campaign on the 19th of June and on election day on the 4th of July, that Reform will reject the influence of the World Economic Forum and cancel Britain's membership of it. It's not necessarily that he is now captured by the World Economic Forum and is going to sign us up to globalist technocracy and have the World Health Organization run our pandemic policy. It's more that this is a transition stage that the likes of Trump and Farage are using to wrestle control of the global hegemon and realign it with the Trump doctrine in Washington, rather than the international outsourcing of sovereignty to the likes of the WEF, the WHO, the United Nations, the European Union, etc. And this is made all the more clear by Bloomberg reporting that one of the reasons Farage is going is because he's going to speak at a USA House online event and at Bloomberg House at the event. So he's using his speeches to call out the international cabal of detached globalist elites as a pretext to then go and mingle with the international business class to try and attract talent who have invested in AI or cryptocurrency or military and medical tech, who have fled for New York or Tel Aviv or Dubai or any of the other, Zurich, countries and cities around the world that are much more friendly investment environments than London at the moment, getting the regime ready for reform. So he is going as part of Trump's broader entourage to realign international business and foreign policy priorities and to prepare this entrenched, terrified establishment for a reform government. And this negotiation of tensions with the United States is also a reason why Farage is speaking at the Bloomberg House and US events at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And a signal of this allegiance comes amidst Nigel Farage denouncing Donald Trump placing tariffs on European nations as well as the UK for failing to support America's annexing of Greenland, a Danish territory. Now, it's sensible for America to want to do this, either the multi-billion-pound buyout that Marco Rubio has proposed, or Trump's playful threats to just annex a territory by force, because they want to station the Golden Dome missile defense system in Greenland. It's a strategically sound place to do so, given how ballistic missiles work. Also, there are rare earth and critical mineral deposits in Greenland, which the Trump administration is looking to secure, not just securing the Western Hemisphere from Chinese interference, but China currently dominates mineral processing as well as the supply chains that it sources formerly from South America, countries like El Salvador and Argentina, which are now US aligned, but also all throughout Africa. They've got not just the transport supply chains, but also the processing and the manufacturing for solar panels and wind turbines, which are crucial to all of these European nations that are pursuing the suicidally economic policy of net zero. And so what the Trump administration wants to do is secure Greenland, and so are penalizing the nation states that reject Trump's geostrategic goals as outlined in the national security document. This is an unpopular move in the UK because Farage knows nobody wants to be seen as a vassal state of the United States, even though we have been since 1945. So Farage is exoterically condemning Trump's move to tariff the UK because it plays popular with the electorate, while behind closed doors, he'll have private conversations with Donald Trump at Davos and other American diplomats and business people to try and smooth over tensions and further align the UK under a reform government with Washington DC, as well as ensuring that the UK can act as an exporter for things like coal or North Sea oil and gas to both the Western Hemisphere and Europe. Ultimately, it's smart for Farage to signal his disagreement with Trump publicly over placing a tariff on Britain, while privately supporting Trump's efforts to annex Greenland, secure critical mineral supply chains, and ensure Western Hemispheric dominance, which is why he's probably going to Davos to talk to him about it. Now, if it wasn't clear, I don't like the World Economic Forum. I think that they are a nefarious, unaccountable international organisation that has our worst interests at heart, and I said so all the way back in March of 2022 on Talk Radio, when doing so would get your career cancelled and called a conspiracy theorist. So this is not me saying I'm glad that Farage is going to the WEF because the WEF are a good thing. Let me be very clear. But if your strategic goals are to reorganise international foreign policy in line with the Trump doctrine, as laid forth in their national security strategy, I covered this document, I'll link it down in the description, and if you're interested in re-attracting all of the investment that fled overseas because of the Conservative and Labour's disastrous handling of the economy, this is a smart move. This hasn't stopped Farage receiving a lot of criticism, though, from his former colleagues to his political right. Rupert Lowe saying we must absolutely and comprehensively reject the influence of the World Economic Forum on British politics. Farage is appallingly desperate to be the new Conservative Party, fresh off the back of all of those defections. And Ben Habib saying, pointing out that the Reform contract with the people, on which he stood as a deputy leader of Reform at the 2024 general election, included as one of its policies a rejection of the influence of the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty. And so, Ben points out that Farage is hypocritical for going to the World Economic Forum. And this has led lots of people to speculate that this is the influence of donors putting pressure on the party. And they've pointed to a major former Tory donor who has given money to Reform. It also doesn't help that he's yet another rich Muslim donor that has thrown money at Reform UK. This is Basim Hadar. He gave the Conservatives more than 700,000 during Rishi Sunak's premiership, but has now given Reform UK 200,000 ahead of last year's local elections, and is likely to give 1 million to the party going forward. He told The Telegraph, "I've always been pro-business and I've always supported the parties that supported businesses. The Conservative Party stopped listening, and for me, I had to go with the party that I believe can actually reset and change the status quo in the UK." A curious use of the term reset there, because Mr. Haidar has, in the past, been a member of the World Economic Forum, which meets at Davos every year, and built his fortune on modernising communications networks in Nigeria, as well as having a £100 million property portfolio in the UK, and a medical cannabis firm, and a hotel in the Caribbean. So he's one of the international business class, a rootless man who is only investing in the UK to make it an attractive place in which to do business. And most of Reform supporters are rooted anywheres who don't want their country turned into a giant shopping mall like Dubai. They don't want it to be a global bus station for people who are economically ambitious. They want it to be a home full of familiar family members. And so there is the concern that even playing nice with the international business class will lead to further demographic churn in the country, even if it is bringing in more in taxes than it takes out. And also that it's going to modernise the UK beyond recognition and turn it into an airport lounge the size of an island. And those are all legitimate concerns, and those aren't things that I want. But if you do want to attract that talent back, it is a sensible move to go to the World Economic Forum and use a speech disparaging that very international business class as cover to then attract that talent and investment back to Britain once Reform win an election in 2029, which they're on track to do. And membership of that international business class is the reason why Nadim Zahawi defected to Reform UK. You remember Nadim Zahawi, the Conservative cabinet minister under Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, who wanted vaccine passports, who wanted a mass amnesty of illegal immigrants, who supported mass third world legal migration, because otherwise the Somalian economy would collapse if they couldn't take our tax money and send it back in remittances. Of what benefit is he to Reform, I hear you ask? Well, according to Isabel Oakeshott, who is Richard Tice's fiancée, who also lives out in Dubai, it's because Zahawi has extensive diplomatic and business connections out in the Middle East. The very same people that Nigel Farage wants to talk to when going to the World Economic Forum.
Let me just go to why is he worth having for Reform. Number one, he has a lot of government experience, and Reform is constantly being told it doesn't have enough people at the heart of the party at a senior level to form a government in future. You know, they've only got 5 MPs, and however many by-elections there might be between now and the next general election, it's not going to lead to a multiple of 5 MPs, even if Reform wins all of those by-elections, which is unlikely. So that means that even if Reform were to win a majority next time round, you've potentially only got 5 MPs that have actually got parliamentary experience, unless you take on some people that have already been MPs. So that's a really important factor. Second, and I actually think this is more important, is that Nadim Zahawi has a strong track record as a very successful businessman. And that is fundamental to the ethos of Reform. Reform is entrepreneurial. Reform is a disruptor. Reform wants people who know how to make money and run successful operations. That's really important too. Thirdly, he's incredibly well connected. He's a brilliant networker, and particularly in the Middle East, he's got very, very good diplomatic connections.
His experience in government might well be a hard sell to Reform's base, who have had a very allergic reaction to all of these Conservative defections. But the real reason for Nadim Zahawi to be brought in, as Nigel Farage said at his defection press conference, is because he has experience making money and is going to make the party a lot of money also. And if he's well connected in Dubai, which he is, I mean, reminder, back when the Telegraph sale was looking to be sold to a investment capital firm in the Emiratis, Redbird IMI, the very same investment capital firm, by the way, that bought The Spectator and then transferred ownership to Paul Marshall's OQS Media, so he now owns The Spectator and Unheard under the same umbrella, and now Paul Marshall is the leading bidder for The Telegraph with the Daily Mail. Well, when Redbird was going to buy the Telegraph, Nadim Zahawi was the middleman in the deal. According to Sky News, which first reported Zahawi's interest in the publications, the former Chancellor sounded out a number of financial backers for the potential bid, and this was back when The Spectator was also being sold, and The Spectator closed its deal in September of 2024 and then transferred ownership to Marshall. He was in talks with IMI, the Abu Dhabi-based company that controls Redbird, IMI, and a large amount of debt in the two titles. Oakeshot's fiancé, Reform's deputy leader Richard Tice MP, gave the same excuse for Zahawi joining Reform to Reform consultant and ally Jeremy Kyle on talk, saying that Zahawi's deep business and diplomatic connections in Dubai and the broader Middle East make him an asset for a future Reform government.
And look, we understand people's issues around some of the points raised about Nadim Zahawi, but again, that was focused around his experience and his international connections, which are also very important when you're aspiring to run a country. And likewise, Robert has got considerable experience, and they believe in what we believe in.
Despite the damage it's done to Reform's perception as not being the Conservative Party 2.0, it's clear that they're positioning themselves as the next party of government by deepening their geostrategic and business ties in not only Dubai, but across the broader Middle East to attract some of that talent back and to make it easier to liaise with nations in the Abraham Accords at the behest of the United States, should Reform become the next party of government. Richard Tice also raises Robert Jenrick here. Don't forget that Jenrick has many of the donors from Conservative Friends of Israel in his corner. His wife is an Israeli-American, his family are Jewish, so Jenrick already has a lot of credibility with the Zionist caucus in both the UK and potentially America, so you can see Reform with their defections from the Conservative Party further allying themselves with both the Abraham Accord nations, Israel, and Washington, D.C. And it's also important to note that Andrew Rosendale, the recent defection from the Conservatives to Reform, has links to the British Overseas Territories, which is especially important given the recent contention over the Diego Garcia base on the Chagos Islands, which Keir Starmer, Lord Hermer, and Philip Sands, a bunch of communist lawyers that have been friends for decades now, have forfeited to the Mauritians. We're paying the Mauritians to take it, and Mauritius is an ally of China, meaning Mauritius could allow the Chinese to swan about on the base. So Reform are filling their ranks with Conservative defectors who have credentials in those territories, in Israel, in the Middle East, in the British Overseas Territories, including Chagos, to bolster our negotiating powers, our business ties, but also to signal their allegiance with a kind of new international policy doctrine coming out of Trump, J.D. Vance, and Washington, D.C. So Oakeshott is correct. Zahawi's business interests in Dubai, intersecting with her own presence and probable business interests in Dubai, the business interests of the likes of Zia Yusuf and other people within Reform, also their friends in the international business community that have left for Dubai because they don't have to pay any income tax there. And if you speak to anyone with significant capital and people that are trying to attract investment, you'll hear that nobody wants to invest in the UK at the moment because it's a hostile environment. Well, attracting that investment and those people back from Dubai is the number one priority of Reform if they want to kickstart an economic resurgence. Now, you might say that you don't necessarily want those industries in the UK, you don't want to have the government prioritise the needs of those rootless anywheres with non-dom tax status. You might say that bringing Nadim Zahawi in is a net detriment. It shows that Reform aren't as serious about breaking up the uniparty as they once were, especially if they're willing to go to the World Economic Forum to court that talent and that investment and those diplomatic ties. You might say all of that, but just from a value-neutral, detached position, if those are Reform's goals, it is a smart move to go to the World Economic Forum and insult them to their faces in the front-facing speech, in the public speech, but then behind closed doors work with people from Saudi and the Emiratis and the United States to realign Britain under a Reform government with the Trump economic and foreign policy doctrine, while also setting up deals in the event of a Reform government that bring back that talent and capital investment and repatriate some of those industries like crypto and AI. And Farage said as much when he was announcing the new head of Reform Scotland, a former Conservative lord. He was talking about net zero and why the policy is so important to the party. It's not just about refusing to sabotage our own energy security and bringing the costs of production and consumer products down. But Farage brought up specific industries, like crypto and AI and data servers and processing.
So we can use renewables in a way as we move forward, but if anyone thinks they're the solution to powering a grid for nearly 70 million people, for supporting what little industry we have left, and frankly what we're also doing is we're closing ourselves off to the 21st century technologies. Data banks, crypto mining, these are all the big technologies of the future, and they use even more energy than the old heavy manufacturing ever did. It is disastrous. Starmer is deluded. Miliband seems to have adopted this as a new religion.
So these are all industries that either reforms officials or the allied nations that Nigel Farage has good diplomatic relations with already, so the United States, Israel, the Emiratis, have an interest in are developing. Military and defense industrial tech, AI, cryptocurrency, and so going to the World Economic Forum and visiting these respective countries and setting up diplomatic and business deals ahead of forming the next government is sensible, even if you or I don't like the countries or individuals or international organizations like the World Economic Forum with whom he is liaising in order to do that. Again, being value neutral, it's a tactically smart move, even if we don't like it. And this is why Nigel Farage visited Dubai in December of 2025 on a trip that was paid for by the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He gifted Farage and guests accommodation and a pass to attend the F1 competition in December, valued roughly at £10,000, according to his MP's register of interests. Farage also held meetings with senior Emirati officials during the two-day trip that took place before Parliament shut down for Christmas. The meetings were arranged by Reform UK's outward-facing treasurer, Nick Candy, who's not doing the lion's work of the business behind the scenes, but he is in there to arrange meetings with, again, international capital. And he regularly travels to Dubai for business. The UAE's leadership, and this is very important, was keen to speak with Reform over shared opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood. Farage has already said he would classify the Muslim group as a terrorist organisation. He promised to do so at conference in September. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, as well as Russia, Syria and Jordan, have already designated the group a terrorist organisation. The British government, under both Cameron, Boris, Sunak and Starmer and May, refused to do so. But recently the United States, under Secretary Rubio, in the State Department, they have designated certain chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organisation. Now, they haven't designated the International Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organisation. The only chapters that they chose to do so are in Egypt, Jordan, Syria and Lebanon, I believe. So the neighbouring regions of Israel, the ones that are likely to be funding the proxy groups like Hezbollah or Hamas, who are firing mortars at Israel. So they're looking to secure the region. But broader point, the Muslim Brotherhood does have funding interests and front groups in the United States, but it's a much greater problem for the UK. For example, the Emiratis have accused Islamic Relief of being a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're one of the largest Muslim charities in Britain. I mean, they take out advertisements on tube barriers in heavily Muslim areas. The business connections and the geopolitical connections make themselves obvious here. This is the reason that Farage is going to the World Economic Forum to speak to people like this. This is why he is flying out to Dubai. And this is why Nigel Farage has pledged to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, because he's trying to make it a friendly environment to officials from the Emiratis to come over, spend money as tourists, or invest as businessmen. This is why, at conference, he said he would ban the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, "We will stop dangerous organisations with links to terrorism operating in our country." Quite why we have been so gutless about this, both Conservative and Labour, I don't know. All across the Middle East, countries have banned and prescribed the Muslim Brotherhood as a dangerous organisation. We will do the very same. And recently, the UAE has cut funding for its citizens to go and stay in the UK over concerns about the Muslim Brotherhood. So you're seeing public and private tension being ratcheted up by the more secular, materialistic Muslim states over the more doctrinaire, Salafist states and front groups that are operating in Western nations. You're seeing a lot of pressure in the press and on the presumptive political parties of government to enact the policies that mean that they'll attract investment from those states and create a political climate conducive to working together. The Emiratis are so concerned about the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Britain that they've stopped their citizens from having sponsored scholarships to go and study at Britain's top universities. In June, the UAE Higher Education Ministry published a list of global universities for which scholarships would be approved and qualifications certified. The list included universities in countries including the US, Australia, Israel, and France, but none in the UK. The exclusion of British universities is linked to an anxiety in the UAE over the rise of Islamic groups on campuses, particularly the pro-Palestinian protests that they are concerned are funded by groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as potentially money from Iran or Qatar. When UK officials asked about the absence of British institutions on the June list, UAE officials said the omission had not been an oversight. Quote, according to a person with direct knowledge of the discussions, the UAE don't want their kids to be radicalised on campus. The UAE's president has already asked Starmer to prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood, and yet again, rather than just make a decision, Starmer has outsourced his critical thinking capacities to the civil service and the bureaucratic process, and has instead commissioned a review, sat on his hands while money continues to flow into the most demented Islamic groups, apparently, according to a 2015 government review, including the Muslim Council of Britain, from the Muslim Brotherhood, fomenting justifications for jihad and saying, well, jihad is just an internal spiritual struggle. It has nothing to do with violent Islamic terror, and going so far as to say that Islamism has nothing to do with Islam, despite them sharing the same root word, and putting you in the strange dilemma where you have to ask, was the Prophet Muhammad himself therefore an Islamist? Doesn't really make sense if you think about it for 10 seconds. And that's why the UAE are sick to death of risking political tumult coming from, if they send their sons and daughters over to the UK to study in universities, they'll then become radicalised by doctrinaire Salafist groups, they'll come back to the UAE and then force the country to become less economically viable and politically stable by pushing for harder line, more authentic readings of the Quran. UK officials are unclear on how the total ban on scholarships was in practice, saying they were aware of cases of some UAE military personnel still getting scholarships over here, but the UAE said it will no longer recognise qualifications from academic institutions that are not on the accredited list, meaning no UK university will administer a qualification that is considered legitimate in the UAE. So that means that if you're in the Emiratis, one of the global capital hubs now, if you have a degree from Oxford or Cambridge, it's basically worthless. So there is the incentive for either the current or now next government, headed up by Nigel Farage, to prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood to attract wealthy Arabs back to the UK for business, for study, for tourism. This is why Farage is going to the World Economic Forum, to have these discussions, to craft his policy according to US, Israeli, Emiratis foreign policy, but also attracting some of this capital back to Britain. And this is why Farage tweeted about the article saying decent Muslim countries cannot believe how weak the UK is on extremism. And this is the source of disagreement that I have with reform. What they're trying to do to appease the Emiratis and the Saudis to attract this investment back, while also realigning themselves with the United States rather than the EU and the European Union, and of course with Israel, is to thread the needle on an anti-jihad, but still pro-moderate Muslim foreign policy and domestic policy. This is why they're trying to ban the burqa and halal. This is why they've promoted Muslim spokespeople like Zia Youssef and Layla Cunningham, while also saying they're going to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, ban cousin marriage. And this is why, as well, that Farage has now appointed a new advisor on foreign policy, one of the founding heads of the Henry Jackson Society, the society that Douglas Murray interned at, and that put out the polling 1 year on from October 7th that found that 3/4 of British Muslims don't believe Hamas did anything wrong, 52% want to ban drawings of their Prophet Muhammad, and a third want Sharia law and Islam to be the official state religion of Britain. And that is most pronounced among second-generation British-born, university-educated Muslims, hence the anxiety the Emiratis have about universities being indoctrination centres funded by the Muslim Brotherhood. Middle East Eye reports rather scathingly on this because they're an outlet that's concerned about the government trying to top-down manage a moderate version of Islam, which is explicitly a project that Reform are trying to engage with. It didn't work under David Cameron, Michael Gove, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. I don't think it's going to work under Reform, which is why I'm very critical of this strategy. But my criticisms of it aside, I'm just trying to build a pattern of what Reform are thinking and the reason why they are frequenting Davos or Dubai, while they're going to the World Economic Forum, why they're banning the Muslim Brotherhood, but also taking in lots of donations from Muslims with investments in crypto and AI. And this is why Farage in the last year has been signaling his allegiance with US, Zionist, and Abraham Accord nations' foreign policy. For example, this kerfuffle over admitting ISIS bride Shamima Begum back to Britain after she was successfully denaturalized by the previous Conservative governments, when Nigel Farage insinuated that he might be open to discussions about bringing Begum back to Britain, and then had to come out and say, I have never wanted to allow Shamima Begum back into Britain, as I literally say in this interview. The reason this was even a conversation topic is because, behind closed doors, Sebastian Gorka, one of President Trump's leading foreign policy and national security advisors, had spoken to both the Labour government, who had told him no, and Nigel Farage, as the presumptive next government, about repatriating Shamima Begum, because there are refugee camps full of terrorists in northern Syria. These camps are the Al-Hol and Roj camps, and the Trump administration wants these cleared out because it makes the region more secure to not have it full of ISIS terrorists, particularly for Israel, particularly for the Abraham Accord nations. But also, there's a lot of oil in northern Syria, and if they can play nice with the new Syrian president, the ex-Taliban jihadist Ahmad al-Sharaa, which is why Trump invited him to the White House and made jokes about how many wives he has, then they can access the oil in the region and have region partners stabilize the Middle East without further need for American boots on the ground in the likes of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, or God forbid, Iran, which would be a complete disaster. So this is America pulling out of their respective hemispheres and trying to create stabilization in the region, and this is why Nigel Farage was umming and ahhing about repatriating Shamima Begum at the request of the Americans, who want respective European nations and Britain to take their terrorists back and deal with them themselves. This is why Nigel Farage has been going to Somaliland independence protests, because, despite him apparently being a long supporter of Somaliland, the idea is that if you create a functional state next to Somalia, then you can have a regional proxy for the likes of the United States and, of course, Israel, because Benjamin Netanyahu, on Boxing Day in 2025, recognized Somaliland as a sovereign state, and that will then allow the US to have an allied state next to another state, which, Somalia, is full of terrorists from ISIS and al-Shabaab, who are getting funding from Western taxpayers because money is flowing straight into the coffers of those jihadist organizations. And also, if you want to deport Somalians from your country, say from Minnesota, where they're running massive clan ethnic cartel fraud schemes, well, you need to stabilize the country, Somalia, to actually put the Somalians back in it. So again, a lot of this is about foreign policy, deportations, yes, but also building international alliances with the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Americans. This is why Nigel Farage was saying, long live the revolution in Iran, at the recent London Reform Conference. This is why he attended a Iranian embassy protest with Nadim Zahawi. Nadim Zahawi is an Iraqi Kurd, and lots of the protesters in Iran at the moment are ethnically Kurdish, who have had long-standing ties with Israel because they have been a disruptive, displaced people trying to seek their own nation, and, of course, that then destabilizes the Islamic theocracies in the region, like the Iranians, that cause lots of trouble for the Israelis. Farage is signaling his allegiance with the Iranian people, yes, who don't want to live under an Iranian theocracy, but also this not quite inorganic protest movement that is trying to topple Ayatollah Khomeini and replace him with the Shah, who is currently hidden out in Washington, D.C., and yet again allied with the US and Israel. So Reform are telegraphing their foreign policy allegiances, not with the United Nations, not with the European Union, not with the global progressive project to signal support for Palestinian statehood, but instead for support for Trump's doctrine in Washington, with Israel, and with the non-jihadist Muslim nations that will be deputized by the United States to police the Middle East. Also another proxy war going on, and that is for the operating system of the British state. And this is why it's important for Farage to go to the World Economic Forum to talk to these tech companies. Because Tony Blair already is. Tony Blair, by the way, is sitting on the Gaza Peace Board, compiled by Donald Trump. And Tony Blair is very good friends with Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison being the multi-billionaire who has just bought TikTok, owns production giant Paramount, and tried to buy Netflix. Larry Ellison owns Oracle, which is a data processing software giant. And in this article by the New Statesman explaining the influence of the Tony Blair Institute on Starmer's government, and this might look like a tangent, but you have to contrast Oracle with Peter Thiel's Palantir, who have aligned with President Trump and seemingly now Reform, to see that this is a battle for the operating system for the government of the future. Since 2021, Larry Ellison's personal foundation, the Larry Ellison Foundation, has donated or pledged at least £257 million to the Tony Blair Institute. Ellison's donations have helped the Tony Blair Institute grow to more than 900 staff working in at least 45 countries, and a disproportionate number of staff and front benchers for Keir Starmer's government come from the Tony Blair Institute, more than any other think tank. Some Tony Blair Institute staff, including a number who left in recent years because of Ellison's influence, say the cash injection has produced a culture that is dominated by a form of AI boosterism, which, as they see it, amounts to lobbying for Oracle. This is supported by documents and those obtained under Freedom of Information access request laws, and it describes an organisation unusually close to the British government, able to lobby ministers directly, which holds joint retreats with Oracle and is willing to engage in tech sales with governments in the rest of the world. And this is why my friend Lewis Brackpool's FOIs about the meetings between Keir Starmer and Bill Gates, or Larry Fink, or Larry Ellison keep getting blocked on the grounds that it would disclose confidential policy-making meetings. So we've got Larry Ellison of Oracle regularly meeting with Tony Blair, who's pulling Keir Starmer's strings, but also Keir Starmer himself and his cabinet ministers, some of whom, like Rachel Reeves, are going to Davos, to negotiate how much more involved Oracle software can be with UK government departments. One example is on the policy of digital ID, something Starmer has pushed for, promised to make mandatory for employment back at September's Labour Party conference, and has backed off of making mandatory for employment, but will still seek to roll out and give to everyone from birth as of 2029. This article says the Tony Blair Institute had been laying the groundwork before Labour won power. Institute staff advised the party in opposition. In May 2024, the Tony Blair Institute wrote a report that called for two radical actions to fix Britain's data access problem. Create a single front door providing seamless access to NHS data, so a national health data processing system, and host all of this data outside the NHS while retaining government control of the programme, meaning that you need a piece of software capable of handling and processing all of that data. Less than 2 months after Starmer's win, the Tony Blair Institute Health Policy Director, Charlotte Refsum, was invited into the Department of Health to meet its digital policy chief, Felix Greaves, documents obtained under FOI show. Greaves asked for her help in designing a giant public consultation on GP data and digital health ID. Refsum was then given an official role in a government working group advising on data and technology policy in Labour's 10-year plan for the NHS. Then, in August 2024, the Tony Blair Institute published a paper on preparing the NHS for the AI era, and they found good reasons for building new digital health records with an existing system run by Oracle. It said that using a system run by its rival, Peter Thiel's Palantir, would be a, quote, controversial option, and that the product had been, quote, slow to make progress in part due to opposition from data privacy groups. So we are locked in a war between Tony Blair, Larry Ellison, and Palantir on one hand, representing the global progressive parties like the EU or Labour, and Palantir, that has been funding the likes of J.D. Vance, with the help of Elon Musk, that has been funding various groups that have supported the Trump revolution and who have individuals quite closely aligned with reform, actually. So we're seeing a jockeying here for global technology firms over whose operating software gets to run the current and next government. In a later paper by the Tony Blair Institute, it recommended linking up data from the NHS, the Department for Work and Pensions, and HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. All of these three bodies are existing Oracle clients. So what you're seeing is an attempt to homogenize government systems under Oracle versus Palantir wanting to get in and run those operating systems before Oracle has all the contracts and it can't get a look in. Elsewhere, Tony Blair Institute staff were brought directly into government while still on the Institute's payroll. Tom Westgarth was part of the Department for Science, Technology and Innovation. Joining the small team working on the government's AI Opportunities Action Plan, his salary was paid by the Tony Blair Institute. Blair also intervened and met regularly with Peter Kyle, the former Science Technology Minister, to embrace AI, telling him in a private meeting there was no other solution to productivity, no other route to growth, and he urged Kyle to meet with the Ellison Institute of Technology. Kyle is going to the World Economic Forum with Rachel Reeves. So you can see that Farage is also going to get prepped on being a competitive partner in this war for whichever data processing and AI software will run the British government. And so there's a curious connection here to explore with Reform's London mayoral candidate, Layla Cunningham. I mean, aside from the fact that she once wanted to be an MI5 spy because she's the daughter of Egyptian immigrants and speaks Arabic, but wasn't allowed because her ex-husband was a foreign national, a wealthy French businessman who then left her for essentially a lookalike and now lives in Dubai running a catering business. After divorcing Philippe Dupuy, Layla then met her current husband, that's American Michael Cunningham. He's originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and he builds AI platforms for the finance industry and is keen to remain out of the limelight. But his lack of standing behind Layla at Reform press conferences doesn't mean that he isn't in any way involved with Reform's business development plans. Because while Layla Cunningham was still a Conservative councillor for Lancaster Gate in the city of Westminster back in 2023, she delivered the opening marks at a AI and biotech summit in London. And in the programme, they mentioned that there are investments of hundreds of millions of pounds in creating new digital healthcare infrastructure, much like the one that Oracle is pushing for the NHS, and developing world-leading open access exascale causal AI computing platforms. Well, what does Michael Cunningham develop? This seems to be his LinkedIn profile, and it turns out he works at Exascale Labs. It seems that Exascale is Michael Cunningham's company because he's sharing clips of Layla Cunningham on the BBC on his Twitter account. And if you look at his credentials, he's licensed by Palantir Foundry Foundations circa May 2024. So what you're seeing is the intersection of little tech, the PayPal Mafia, Palantir, Peter Thiel, investment in AI, cybersecurity, competing with the likes of Larry Ellison, the Tony Blair Institute, and Oracle. What you're seeing is wanting to attract investment back from the United States and Dubai and Israel. What you're seeing is an investment in cryptocurrencies, which are being trialed as national currencies in US-aligned states in the Western Hemisphere, in Argentina and El Salvador especially. So you're seeing this flourishing alt-tech sphere where a lot of money is flowing around, that are politically discontented with the regulatory environment in the EU, that are politically discontented with the politics of third worldism and the appeasement of jihadist groups like Hamas. You've got a real mix here of Arabs concerned about the line of succession for their family and so wanting to preserve their place in their domestic political hierarchy and minimize the amount of disruptive Islamic radicalism. But also there are quite a lot of Jewish billionaires who, for want of a better term, were mugged by reality after October the 7th and saw just how many on the left in their countries hated them and wanted them dead because they were white settler colonialist, etc. And so you've got this emerging alliance of international techno-capital, Abraham Accord states, and countries that have been realigning with the Trump doctrine of Western hemispheric security, all meeting and intersecting as a parallel power base to the UN and the EU and BRICS. And so Reform are picking a side. They're telegraphing their support for American and Zionist foreign policy. They are trying to attract investment back from large data processors like Palantir, but also crypto investment and new energy generation technologies. And they're trying to bring back their expats from Dubai or Tel Aviv or New York or even El Salvador. This is why Nigel Farage is going to the World Economic Forum. This is why he keeps flying to Dubai. This is why they've had so many Tory defectors. It's a matter of foreign and economic policy and entrenching existing and developing new diplomatic and business ties. So while we may hate the insidious woke globalism of the World Economic Forum, it seems that the forum itself, having invited Farage, recognizes the trajectory of political travel, is bending the knee to Donald Trump, and obviously hoping to sand off some of the rougher edges of Trump's attempt to mix up geopolitics and the international economy, but also recognises that Nigel Farage is likely to be the next Prime Minister, and so wants to parley with him. And Farage benefits from this because he can go and deliver a speech that at least rhetorically repudiates the values of the World Economic Forum and gets clipped by his base and celebrates as our Nige going and socking the globalists one, while also developing those business and foreign policy strategic ties. So even though I personally hate the World Economic Forum just as much as I hate the United Nations or the Muslim Brotherhood, no matter how I feel about it, it is a tactically clever move in just foreign policy and business terms for Nigel Farage to go to the World Economic Forum.